that could run and win. And we spent a year preparing. We went to different cities around the country. I remember going and meeting with briefly with Mayor Sam Massell in Atlanta, spent a lot of time with Maynard Jackson, who was the vice mayor, went out to San Francisco to meet with Mayor Aliotto's folks, went to a couple other cities to take a look at what they were doing and how they were solving and dealing with their various problems. And so when the campaign started, we announced and we were off and running. Man, we were making good progress. And then the Michigan Supreme Court, led by an opinion of Chief Justice John Swainson.
Who challenged? Who brought the challenge?
I think Bob Millender and Coleman Young made the challenge.
They wanted to
and they knocked the statute out because it was too late at that time for him to run. Knocked the statute out. He ran, and of course we got our clocks clean. Ed Bell and us, and I remember walking behind somebody's home out in Palmer Woods, and here I am, a rookie, trying to deal with Bob Millender and Coleman Young, and I'm there with Ed Bell trying to talk them out. I know you can run, but why don't you not? We've done that. We've been doing this. We've been covering so many blocks. We've been passing out literature. We've been there. Can't we work it out? And they were very polite and said no.
Yes.
And so then when the election, the primary was over, it was between the chief of police, John Nichols, and State Senator Coleman Young,
Yes.
who I had a lot of respect for and admired. And might have gone the other way if I'd been asked by him earlier if I knew he was going to run. But it turned out that after the primary, Ed Bell got very deeply involved in the campaign and helped Coleman Young, and I was glad to volunteer. And they became best of friends. And after he first got into office, I got an appointment from Mayor Coleman Young to be on the taxi cab commission. We would take a look at the rates that taxi cab drivers could charge, and I remember doing a lot of reading, asking a lot of questions about the drop rate, and today I look at the drop rate when I get in the cabs around the country, and I won't even use, like sometimes you go to some hotels and you are going back to the airport and hotels. Well, we got this car, so I said I'd rather be in a taxi. But in any event, the point is that Bob Millender asked if I would be the campaign manager, and I said yes. And it was another excellent opportunity to learn from a person who I deeply respected as a outstanding strategist.
Now, who was the opponent that time for re-election?
Ernie Brown, who was
who had been
a
on
member,
the city council.
member of city council. And the strategy from the Brown campaign was, here is somebody who is polished, who'd been from the business community, who understood the city, who was on city council, and here's somebody who's brash, who's taking on the police department, taking on other kind of things. And I suggested to Bob Millender a strategy that would undermine and cut the legs out of everything that they were trying to do in terms of making him sort of like the well-established, polished person, and someone who didn't relate to everybody. And by the time we got through, Mayor Coleman Young was walking on water, swimming, and did not get wet. And we just rolled over, and he won re-election.
Well, you suffered or got the same rap, did you not, when you were running for mayor?
Mine was different.
Some of the younger up-and-comers were saying you were not in touch with. You were too much establishment.
Well, there was some of that. it basically boiled down to what I thought was the most appropriate approach to win, because if I was going to win, I wanted to win on my terms, and I wanted to win on a strategy that I thought would help the city overcome the challenges that it was facing. And so while I was on the Michigan Supreme Court, I was encouraged by a number of people to consider resigning and run for the office of mayor.
Now, you'd been appointed
I was appointed by Jim Blanchard.
by Blanchard, and then,
Let's go back to that for a moment.
okay,
When the first Chrysler crisis hit, and Chairman and CEO Lee Iacocca was reaching out and needing help to get the appropriate financing for Chrysler for the bailout, there was Don Regal in the Senate.
Congressman
And-
from the Senate at that time.
Yes.
Yeah, had been Congressman from Flint.
And he switched parties from Republican to
Correct.
Democrat. And then there was Senator Carl Levin. And in the House, the real leader there was none other than Jim Blanchard. And I'm saying to myself, my goodness, look at this. And we'd had a long time serving governor, William G. Milliken, who, despite the Democrats' best efforts with candidates like Sandy Levin, who now is in the United States House and is just a phenomenal congressman, Bill Fitzgerald,
Yes.
who's Senate Majority Leader, great guy, wonderful person, but so was G. Minna Williams. And he and Mayor Young got along exceedingly well. There was some belief or some kind of myth that the mayor was really not enthusiastically involved to defeat him when it came time for the governor's race, because
Now you say myth.
myth.
Yeah,
I'll
you
just leave
think
it at
it's
that.
a myth?
I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, okay. so we,
In any event, they got along exceedingly well because Governor Milliken understood what was needed to be done and how to move the legislature to be of help to the city of Detroit. And even at a time when some legislators frankly ran not against their opponent, but they ran against the city of Detroit or ran against Mayor Young. And Governor Milliken always found a way for the two of them, and so did the mayor, for them to communicate, to talk about issues, to get things done. And if you think back, from my point of view, just as an aside, the worst thing that ever happened to the state of Michigan was term limits, because it took away institutional memory and knowledge, etc. And you had, unlike we see in today's times in the last several years, where people could not get along and trade votes and do that kind of thing. And so when Governor Milliken indicated that he was not going to run again, there were a lot of people who were thinking about lining up and running for that seat. A lot of outstanding folks, some of whom were in Congress as well. I went to Jim and said, I think you ought to go. I remember being at an event in the Rensen at some dinner, and we just happened to be at the same table. I said, why don't you go? You can make this. You can do this. I'm sure he did it because others higher up than me would suggest it, but he then ran, and I helped him win. And he did an outstanding job as governor of the state of Michigan. And I was fortunate enough, if you might recall, Mr. Justice Jim Ryan was interested in and was nominated by the president and confirmed by the United States Senate to serve on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, to leave the Michigan Supreme Court, which left a vacancy.
Right.
And I was finishing up as president of the State Bar of Michigan, had gone all around. And there were those who were suggesting that I might be an ideal candidate to serve on the Michigan Supreme Court. Because I
To
had,
fill the Ryan vacancy.
yes,
Yeah.
and it was just a short term for 1 year, because the election was in 1986.
Oh, you had to immediately then run.
Absolutely.
You were appointed, and then you had to immediately run because your appointment just lasted through his term.
And we had not had a person of color on the Michigan Supreme Court since Otis Smith, who
Yes.
was a very, very brilliant scholarly lawyer who lost to Thomas Brennan, who was on the Wayne County Circuit Court, and as the story goes, as he shared with me, he was out mowing grass, and he was called by the party and asked, "Can we put your name in to run against Otis Smith?" And he said yes, and I'll quickly, but he said yes. He was nominated. He beat Otis Smith, and back in 1967, United States Senator Phil Hart had the dilemma of who to choose to appoint to the Eastern District of Michigan. Would it be lawyer Damon J. Keith, or former Supreme Court Justice, former auditor, or not, whatever? There was another office that Otis had served in and did a remarkable job. And Phil Hart chose Damon Keith. And of course, that was not, I don't think, a real tough loss. And here's what I mean. Otis Smith, because of his tremendous talent and wisdom, and a great lawyer, was chosen by General Motors to become the first African American general counsel of a Fortune 500 company, the largest company in the world, and he did a remarkable job. So both Damon Keith and Otis Smith did remarkable work in providing role models that you couldn't ask for better people. But when the opportunity came about, I was asked if I would be willing to serve as a member of the Michigan Supreme Court, and I said yes. And Governor Blanchard made that appointment or nomination in November of 1985, and when Mr. Justice Jim Ryan transferred over after the first of the year to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, I was sworn in.
So you experienced appointment initially.
Yes.
And then
Ran
immediately
as an
ran. The ongoing debate, as current as this year when Justice Ryan and Justice Kelly convened a judicial selection reform committee, the debate has been ongoing about appointment versus election. How should we select Supreme Court justices? Do you feel strongly about that?
I will tell you, I can understand why both would come down with the recommendation that their task force came up with.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it because when I ran, for example, I think we raised about $350,000.
Tell us the year again is
1986.
86.
Dean Robb raised about $450,000. Dean Robb was the other Democratic nominee.
He was an attorney in the upper part of the state.
Traverse City.
Traverse City.
Then they had former United States Senator Robert Griffin.
Yes.
Then there was Judge McKenzie, who was on the circuit court. There was 24 of us who were running for 2 spots. And I had great people helping me, and because I've been around the state as state bar president, speaking in different bars, I had the bar association, not bars, bar
Right, yes.
associations.